Welcome to the session on Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, one of the most influential philosophers of modern times, is well known for the Copernican revolution that he brought about in the field of epistemology. He was born and brought up in Königsberg and made University of Königsberg his domain of activities, at first as a student, then a lecturer, and finally professor. He never left the environs of Königsberg, never married, and led uneventful life of a scholar, which culminated in the publication of his monumental philosophical works, Critique of Pure Reason in 1781, Critique of Practical Reason 1788, and the Critique of Judgment in 1791, which alongside the other works form the three pillars of what is popularly known as his critical philosophy. These three critiques have exerted a profound influence not only on subsequent philosophy, but rather on the entire intellectual climate of the West. The three Kantian concerns. Kant's philosophy can be characterized as an attempt to answer three fundamental questions. First, what can I know? Second, what ought I to do? And third, what may I hope for? The Copernican revolution. The first of these questions is what he addresses in the Critique of Pure Reason. According to him, the traditional concept of knowledge rests on a fundamental mistake. Both rationalists and empiricists conceptualize mind as something active, so that having been furnished with ideas, it would proceed to inspect them and issue judgments as to what the truths they can yield. In this conceptualization of mind, a more fundamental question has been overlooked. Thus, how is knowing brought about? Or how does the mind work when it yields knowledge? Kant brings these questions back to focus, paving way to the Copernican revolution referred to before. Broadly, it consists in reversing the assumption that all knowledge must conform to objects, and proposing that in order to be known, the object must conform to certain conditions set by the cognitive apparatus of the subject. What are these conditions? Transcendental aesthetics and transcendental logic. Kant lays them bare by analyzing the traditional templates of knowledge known as truths of reason and truths of facts. Truths of reason are the ones whose denial would be self-contradictory, whereas the truths of facts require confirmation by experience. Kant called the former analytic judgments and the latter synthetic judgments. Thus, analytic judgments are known a priori, that is, prior to or independent of any act of confirmation by experience, whereas synthetic judgments are known only a posteriori, that is, after some act of confirmation. For example, the proposition all bachelors are unmarried is analytic, whereas the proposition 15th of August 2015 is a Saturday is synthetic. The former does not yield any new knowledge and is simply true on the principle of non-contradiction, whereas the latter does yield knowledge and requires verification by reference. But this classification does not exhaust the realm of human knowledge, and there is a peculiar combination of these two, which in fact form the fundamental framework of the very process of knowing. According to Kant, there are some judgments which are synthetic, that is, convey some information, and yet are a priori, that is, are true without verification. Kant calls them synthetic a priori judgment, and through an analysis as to the tenability of them, he establishes the cornerstone ideas of his philosophical enterprise. The statement, every event has a cause, for Kant is a typical case of a synthetic a priori judgment. But how is this so? Now, this has a subtle connection with the way human mind works. As indicated before, though the mind plays an active role in the construction of knowledge, it's not a free and unconditioned engagement for it. Rather, there is a certain modality and conceptuality within which it should function, if at all it has to. Causality is such a fundamental mode and concept of operation for the human mind. Thus, By way of affirming the above synthetic a priori judgment, we are simply recognizing the fact that an uncaused event would not be acceptable to the mind, rendering it unthinkable. Now, that the synthetic a priori judgments are essential prerequisites for the working of human mind, there are two fundamental concepts which lay at the base of even them. They are the concepts of time and space. All events presuppose these concepts. Space is the condition of all possible material objects, and all events happen in time. Hence, these concepts are different from others, and Kant designates them to be the pure forms of sensibility. They are pure because they are not dependent on any particular experience, rather are presupposed in all experience. Formal because they are unaffected by the content of experience, and still they reveal themselves only through the medium of sensible experience. Kant entitles this new doctrine of space and time transcendental aesthetics, where aesthetic simply means sense perceptible, and transcendental stands for fact of time and space transcending any particular sense perception. Supplementing the transcendental aesthetics is his transcendental logic, which along with the former establishes the conditions of human cognitive apparatus which we had set out for in the beginning. Just like the pure forms of sensibility, mind also has pure concepts of understanding, which Kant, borrowing a term from Aristotle, calls categories of understanding. Unlike the former, they are fundamental for the assimilation of sense perceptions as subjective experience. The categories include the basic concepts of first, quantity, unity, plurality and totality; second, quality, reality, negation and limitation; third, relation in terms of inherence, causality and reciprocity; and finally, modality in terms of possibility or impossibility, existence or non-existence, necessity or contingency. True to the way Kant named them, they could be put in one-to-one correspondence with Aristotelian syllogistic statements as shown in the table. For example, the statement all birds can fly could be subjected to an analysis with respect to the table shown. When viewed from the quantity point of view, the statement qualifies as universal, referring to unity. Similarly, it may refer to a few particular ones or a singular one, qualifying itself to be referring to plurality or totality respectively, and so on, with the other categories as well. One must not think of pure concepts of understanding as if they were independent of all experience. They are declared to be pure not because they somehow can exist and operate by themselves, but because they are present in all experience as its indispensable conditions. Kant repeatedly emphasizes that the categories are logical categories. They are the ways in which we see the world, not instruments which transform or distort the world. They are a priori but not temporally prior. It is not the case that the mind at birth is equipped with the categories themselves with sense experience added later. The discovery of categories is a result of a logical analysis of experience. Further, these categories appear to have a more extended application than space and time. But Kant warns us that such application will be a mistake. Many philosophers, for instance, have committed the folly of using the concept of causality in talking and devising proofs about God, who, as they also claim, is neither in space nor in time. The use of categories, therefore, is to be restricted to spatio-temporal objects or appearances, whereby appearances Kant means objective phenomena, accessible to and knowable by everyone under normal conditions. He terms them as phenomena, whereas the things in themselves or noumena are inaccessible to human knowledge, in the sense that they don't conform to the requirements of our cognitive apparatus. Hence, they can only be thought about but not known. Once the foundational role played by pure forms of sensibility and categories of understanding is grasped properly, the functionality of synthetic a priori judgments in the formation of valid knowledge becomes clearer. We have already seen the case of causality. Another prime candidate is the idea of substance that has been a perennial philosophical issue. In fact, just like the idea of causality, substance is also a category of the mind. Substance is not something mysterious worth calling I know not what, like Locke did, but the power of the mind to hold together an indefinite number of properties.